We take a hard look at the advanced statistics on Diontae Johnson and George Pickens and why they could become a dynamic duo for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we bring your team every day here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get right into this. Now, we've talked a lot about different positions. We've talked to Diontae Johnson and George Pickens in the locker room and played some of their clips here, but I wanted to take a step back and use some advanced statistics to look at how these guys did last year and how they could do better or worse in next year. But I think it's going to be the former that they're going to do better because a lot of different factors. One, Kenny Pickett being more experienced. Two, them being more familiar with him and the entire offense. And three, when you look at some of the statistics that we've now been able to gather from people going back over the season and putting out new advanced metrics out there, I think you're going to start to see the picture as far as how good these guys can be as a 1-2 punch at wide receiver. And then they won't even be getting into Allen Robinson and Calvin Austin and the guys behind them in the Steelers receiving core. But let's look at a few things here. And let's start with George Pickens, because I think he's the guy that everyone's really excited to see take a second-year leap in the NFL. Now, we've heard him say that he thinks that he could be a lot better. We had him on we had a clip of him on the show earlier during OTAs when he was talking about his biggest thing that he worked on in the offseason was route running, because he wanted to get more separation and he wanted to create more yards after the catch for himself. But let's look at some advanced metrics here on George Pickens for a second. And I'm going to pull up some charts. So if you're watching on YouTube, you get the benefit of seeing it. If you're listening in your car or wherever you listen to your podcasts, I'll talk you through the numbers that we're showing on screen. Now, these numbers come from a great website that I can't recommend enough. It's called Reception Perception. And I encourage everyone to go check this out, because this is some hard research done by a guy named Matt Harmon. He seems to do a lot of good stuff here. And he puts together charts going over several different receivers. Now, he hasn't done a full chart and explanation for Diontae Johnson, but he does have some raw numbers on him. We'll get to him later. But let's look at the charts that Matt Harmon put together on his website, Reception Perception, on George Pickens. Now, as we're looking at this, there's two charts that I'm putting on the screen here. On your left, you have the success by route chart, and literally this is a route tree of all the different routes that George Pickens ran in 2022 and where he had the most success. On the right, you have the percentage of how many times he ran the different routes. And I think you get a clear picture as far as a theme that we've talked about a lot here on the show. If you look at the route percentage, where are the lowest percentages that you're looking at for George Pickens? It's routes directed towards the middle part of the field, those being slant routes. That would be that there's only 10.7% of his routes were slants, 7.7% were digs, 5.1% were posts. Those are all inside facing routes that when he cuts into them, that's going to the middle part of the field, and that's where he was targeted the least. The places where he was targeted the most: deep routes. The 9 route is your go route, typical, just go out there. That's what he was targeted the most, period. 32.4% of his passes were there. Corner routes, 9.2%. Another big route was curl routes, which technically break inside, but curl routes are more of like they're facing the inside. It's not like they're cutting more to the middle part of the field. It's still very much a route that's based on living on the outside. But you look at all the other routes and you see where the emphasis was for him as far as being targeted last year. 32.4% on go balls, 9.2% on corner routes, 5.1% on out routes, comeback routes, 5.1%, and again, curl routes, 19.5%. So a lot of George Pickens' routes were put in places where he could kind of win jump ball situations or be at least a safer target for Kenny Pickett to kind of isolate him in the defense and say, hey, I can go find my guy this way. But what I think is also interesting is when you compare that was the route percentage of how many times he ran different routes, but the success that he had in different routes. And I think it's also a good sign that when you look at it across the board, that he was able to be a threat in a lot of different positions. Now, he was able to have success in 58% of his go routes, but he also was successful in 85.7% of his post routes. Those are in post routes, that's going up and then breaking towards the middle part of the field, but still attacking vertically, basically attacking the field goal post, which is why they call it a post route. But you look at that number, that success route, I think that has to do with his ability to go up and get the football, and Kenny Pickett finding him there to do it. He was also successful in his out routes, where he won 85.7% of those, corner routes 64%, dig routes 61.9, curl routes 67.9, slants 69 percent there, and he caught 100% of his flat routes, but he only ran about 1.5% of his routes there anyways. So point being, though, you see success here from George Pickens on a lot of those different routes that we're talking about on the outside, but towards the inside, it gets a little less successful there. But again, I look at George Pickens and I look at the strengths that he has consistently brought in his rookie season, and the strength that I see the most that he was able to bring was his ability to go up, snag the ball, pull it down in whatever situation, not worry about traffic, and keep things going. But now, if you are dealing with a more detailed wide receiver, a guy that gets open more regularly, I think you're going to find him to be an even bigger threat for Kenny Pickett to target. And also, again, looking at these numbers, what's something that we've said a lot about this upcoming season is that we fully anticipate Kenny Pickett to get more chances in the playbook to use the middle part of the field, to be more aggressive. The Steelers had him avoiding that part of the field much of this year. Many people said it was Matt Canada calling bad plays. Some of it was sometimes there were guys open in the middle part of the field. Kenny Pickett wasn't going there. Why? Because his number one job was to protect the football in a lot of these games, because he was a rookie quarterback and they had a defense that was really good, and they didn't want him to jeopardize the game and be too aggressive and mess up any of the opportunities that the defense might have to win the game for them. But in this upcoming season, he's still not going to have the full reins of the offense. He's not going to get full say to do everything he wants, but he's going to get a chance, I think, to be more aggressive. They're going to trust him to do more. So you're going to see, I think, a higher percentage in those post routes, in those dig routes, in those slant routes, getting Pickens towards the middle part of the field and letting him use his jump ball ability, use his combat catch ability to win more of those situations, because when he's given those opportunities, I do think that he will be able to find more success for Kenny Pickett and maybe even be a bigger playmaker in those results and break tackles and create more yards after the catch in those situations. And I really think that even if he's not the sharpest route runner, which he wasn't last year, and that's more so Diontae Johnson's bank, we'll get to him in the second segment, I really do think that he could be the yin and yang of George Pickens and Diontae Johnson, could be a deadly dose for defenses who do not focus on that part of the Steelers offense. If they truly are going to be a running offense where Najee Harris is kind of bowling people over and Jalen Warren's the second hit there, and then they're running play action, they're hitting you with Pat Freiermuth. If these two guys are the yin yang 1-2 punch that I'm thinking of, this could make for an even better offense, and it could make for Kenny Pickett an easier job for him to find success with them. We'll talk about how Diontae Johnson fits in there in just a minute, because I know there's a lot of slander out there against Diontae Johnson, and hey, he's made plenty of mistakes. He had plenty of drops, but I think there's also plenty of good things that will really come to you when you see some of the numbers that we're going to put here on the show. Also from Reception Perception, shout out to Matt Harmon. Go subscribe to his website because they have a lot of great data there. But first, before we do any of that, we're going to talk to you guys about one of our great sponsors, and that's FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the number one sportsbook in America, and it's time to take your first swing at betting on Major League Baseball on FanDuel, because you'll get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200 back. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can bet on. You can spend betting on everything from the money line to the over/under to who you think is going to hit the first run in the game that you're watching tonight. All in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to get to bet than on MLB than FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. So it's time today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We keep going with the show here, and we're going to talk about Diontae Johnson here a bit. And you guys, if you've watched and listened to this show for quite some time, you know my feelings about Diontae Johnson. I think that he has been put in a disadvantageous situation. 2019 was his first year where he had to work with Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges. 2020, we saw him have a really good year, but then in the second half of the year, kind of tailed off with Ben Roethlisberger's legs kind of coming out from under him and him not being able to complete as many deep balls. And then 2021, we saw the old man version of Ben Roethlisberger. 2022 was Kenny Pickett's rookie season. So Diontae Johnson has not had a prime quarterback who everyone could agree was from start to finish was at his best and was giving him a great opportunity to win consistently and to make big plays. But even so, Diontae Johnson could be better, and we've acknowledged that. He's had a drops problem here and there. He's kind of gone backwards and missed some opportunities to convert first downs when he's trying to make guys miss. But I also have always said the entire time, like, man, I really think this guy has a lot of things that are special about him, and specifically his route running, his ability to get open is much better than I think many people give him credit for. And to do this, we went to Reception Perception, and they have charts of how receivers do versus man and versus zone. And I want to show you the differences here when we're looking at those numbers. Let's look at Diontae Johnson's numbers versus man coverage. These are the top six receivers top 7 receivers in the NFL with their success rate versus man coverage, according to receptionperception.com. Number 1 is Stephon Diggs at 79.4%. Number 2 is Justin Jefferson. Number 3 is A.J. Brown. Brandon Ayuk at 4. Calvin Ridley at 5. And there's Diontae Johnson as the 6th most successful route runner against man coverage, with 76.1% of the time when he's run a route against man coverage, he has found a way to get open and either make a play or just be open for his quarterback there. And that's on 134 different times that he faced man coverage for the Steelers. And actually, Calvin Ridley's was from 2021. So taking that out, he's actually a top five guy in that department. So really, again, a top 5 guy there against man coverage. And again, I'm emphasizing this because there's so many times that I think that people, they look at the hard numbers and that he didn't have a touchdown last year. And yeah, that was not great. But we're talking, if you're looking at this percentage wise, 76.1% out of 134 routes against man coverage, that's over 100 routes. That means over 100 times when he was asked to run against man coverage, he found success. Again, 100 out of 101 officially out of 134. Now let's switch to zone coverage, because you might think, oh, well, okay, maybe he was just beating guys who were just lined up against him. No, Diontae Johnson finds the holes in zone coverage as well. And in fact, he's ranked number 4 there at finding success against zone coverage. And he faced that slightly more times at 147 reps against zone coverage. And in those times, he found success 83.7% of the time. That's only behind Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson, and Deebo Samuel. It's ahead of the likes of Michael Pittman, Juju Smith-Schuster, and A.J. Brown, who are the next 3 under him there. But that's really good company for Diontae Johnson to be keeping there. And I can't emphasize that enough, that he is finding ways to win in whatever situation people are lining up against there. Also, 83.7% of 147 routes against zone, that's 123 times that he was open against zone coverage. And so you're thinking here, like, man, this guy really is that good at getting open. Remember the metrics we talked about earlier in the year, where I think 538.com rated George Pickens as the best combat catch guy in the NFL and rated Diontae Johnson as about best guy getting separation in the NFL. And if you look at these numbers, both against zone, against man, Diontae Johnson among the best in the NFL today at getting open in either situation. And these are also different skills. You might think like, well, okay, Chris, he just runs good route, but you have to understand the details that go into running good routes. When you're running against man, you have to understand that most of the time, man, they're fixing for inside leverage. You got to figure out a way. They're looking to press you. They're looking to stick with you, and you have to find a way to win inside leverage. Find a different way how to how to get in front of them, create space between you and the quarterback that creates that streamline. And that's also studying and how they're approaching you. How do you work a guy to create that space? If they're lining up on on your inside shoulder there, as most man corners do, you have to find a way to create space by using several different setups in your routes. It's something that Antonio Brown was elite at in his time with the Pittsburgh Steelers, with that the way he started his route was always so consistent and it could break in so many different directions. Cornerbacks couldn't pick up on where he was going most of the time. Diontae Johnson, I think he runs a very similar way. When you watch his routes, when he starts into them, you can't read where he's going most of the time. And then by the time that he's made his move, you're still reacting to it. And that's why he's getting so open. And that's, again, why I think that he can be such a good complement with George Pickens and vice versa. Both of them can complement each other very well because he's going to get open. Now, again, against zone, it's a little bit different because zone, you have to have an understanding of the defense itself also on top of running those good routes to not give away where you're actually going and to actually catch people off guard. But with zone, you also have to find the soft spots in the zone, because oftentimes, like if you're in cover two and you're trying to, you have a post pattern, but you need to break to that real middle part of the field to break in between the safeties to get to that right part. That's where Diontae Johnson finds a way to work too. And Pat Freiermuth also deserves credit for this too. He does this a lot very well, where when especially when there's a scramble drill and there's zone coverage and there's guys kind of lurking, you have to find the soft spots in the zone there. And that time to do that, it takes understanding of overall schematics, understanding of chemistry, knowing when to attack at certain moments, and also going to be aware when to do it with your quarterback to get that timing. And it's important to note that last year, none of these guys had timing chances to work with Kenny Pickett. And I want to talk about this more in the next segment too, because we've talked about this before with how Kenny Pickett kind of tried to get himself ready without getting the chance to really run with the first team as much. But Diontae Johnson didn't have the chance to really build that rapport with Kenny Pickett that much, and he still was finding ways to get open for him at different times. And the same thing went for Mitch Trubisky. If you remember the insane one-handed catch that Diontae Johnson pulled down against the Bengals in week 1, they probably don't win that game without that catch because of the field position it created in an important part of the game. But I look at Diontae Johnson and his ability to get separation and how he's gotten sharper at that every single year. I think with a consistent quarterback in Kenny Pickett, you're going to see bigger and better numbers from him as well, and in different ways than how George Pickens will do it. And if you have that combination, I truly think it gives you a deadly option on the field that defenses will have a hard time game planning for unless they have just great cornerbacks that can lock up either type of wide receiver, because both, I think, are dangerous in how they are on the field. And again, when you bring on guys like Allen Robinson, who's also an efficient route runner, Calvin Austin, who's a complete burner, and then of course you still have Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, Zach Gentry. You have all sorts of options that can confuse people, and this is where it's going to come down to Matt Canada. Can you make the offense work with all his talent? Because if he doesn't, he's gone. This is his last year. But if he does, I think that there's some meat on the bone for the Steelers to be able to find more answers in the offense to how to put up points, and maybe they have a faster climb back to being one of the better offenses in the NFL than many anticipated with how the last crew broke up with Ben Roethlisberger's retirement, Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro, Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, all those guys departing. And if they can recreate that group with sooner rather than later, it would be a huge boost to the offense. But I want to talk about how these guys can be a dynamic duo with Kenny Pickett here on the Locked On Steelers podcast in just a minute. Stick with us. We got specific notes on the chemistry and how I think things could play out. All that and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Be right back. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our discussion here because I think the Steelers, I think about the Steelers if you heard my record projections. We talked about it with Kel Berger on the Thursday episode yesterday, and he projected them to have 12 wins. I had 11, but both of us think that the Steelers will overshoot the over-under of win totals at set at 8.5 by Las Vegas right now. And I think they're going to have a better year. And this group is also part of why I think they'll have a better year. Because remember what I told you about Kenny Pickett when I said a source close to the team told me specifically that last year when Kenny Pickett was looking to get sharper early on before he had won the starting job and he didn't know how to kind of get the important reps he needed to understand things with the first team, and that he basically, to do that, he would come in very early before practices started and he would go over everything that the first team offense would do step by step and then practice it on his own. And then the Steelers would practice, and then he would go and work with the second team or the third team or whoever he was working with on that day. But he was doing the mental reps to get ready there. But now he's doing not just the mental reps, but the physical reps to get ready with the rest of the offense, and specifically those receivers: Diontae Johnson, George Pickens, Allen Robinson, Calvin Austin. And even when they're away from the Steelers facility, we're seeing videos of Kenny Pickett pop up and keep working on getting that timing down. And I think with guys like Diontae Johnson, timing is so important when they're proficient and efficient route runners, and they're getting that kind of separation. You need to be the kind of quarterback that can get them the ball at the right moment so that they can win their route and then turn right into being a playmaker. Because we've also seen Diontae Johnson be a playmaker in his career. Remember his rookie season, he was asked to return punts and he was dangerous with the ball in his hands. And I think that he still is. I think that sometimes his ability to be dangerous comes back to bite him when he tries to do too much and he gives up yards because he's juking backwards and he's giving up yards there. But by and large, it's because he's a playmaker and he's trying to make a play for his team in those situations. And the Steelers are paying him big money to be that guy. And I think that Diontae Johnson, with a more experienced Kenny Pickett, can get more results like that. But also with George Pickens on the other side, because here's that yin and yang that I'm talking about here. That if you're a really good secondary and you got two corners that you trust, normally corners have specialties that they're good at shutting down. Like some guys are better more as physical corners who can lock up bigger wide receivers. Some guys are quicker and they can run with route runners. But most of the time, they still have to line up with their defense and kind of deal with. They still have to deal with different assignments, and they can't always follow specific receivers all around the field. And when you have two very different types of wide receivers, and again, in an offense that you're thinking is going to be running the ball better, that's going to be throwing the ball better to Pat Freiermuth, that's going to be working play action more, those two receivers, and if not every team has the corners to counter these two different types of receivers, I think you're giving Kenny Pickett some really good chances to find the open man, to find opportunities to get the ball in the hands of playmakers who I think can be really talented for the Steelers moving forward. And again, looking at the numbers here, just for Diontae Johnson, one thing that's talked about is his drops. And hey, he dropped 8 passes last year. That certainly was a lot, and you'd like to not have as many as those, but Jalen Waddle and Stephon Diggs both dropped more passes than Diontae Johnson. And in fact, A.J. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, they dropped one less pass than Diontae Johnson. I think part of it also is timing. If you remember way back, I think it was 2016, when the Steelers went and signed Michael Vick as a backup quarterback. Might have been 2015. I might be mixing up my years. But there was a game against the Ravens when Michael Vick was playing, and he threw a pass to Antonio Brown. And this was Antonio Brown at his prime of primes. And because the ball spin was just different, Antonio Brown didn't haul it in for a touchdown. Everyone was like, what's wrong with AB? Why couldn't he pull that off in that moment? Sometimes if you're not in sync with how your quarterback operates, even if you are an elite of the elite wide receivers, it can mess up everything for you. And I think that's where Diontae Johnson has kind of been in this no man's land of not having that. He had that with Ben Roethlisberger for a little bit, but again, then Ben Roethlisberger got old and he started to deteriorate in his skills. And so Diontae Johnson has to find that rapport again. But I think that it seems like he's doing what he can to learn with Kenny Pickett how they're going to work together. And George Pickens, we saw last year, those two seem to really trust each other, him and Kenny Pickett, with how they're able, with how Kenny Pickett's very comfortable throwing the ball up to him in different situations, and George Pickens knowing where to go, high point the ball to prove the trust that his quarterback has put in him. And I think that that's going to be a big thing here, is that if these two are these two contrasting styles, you're going to have your cornerback groups that don't have the right guy to stick with one of them. And that can be the one that Kenny Pickett picks on in a game to give them more open opportunities while they're building their offense. And again, we've talked about it, that this offense has an identity now, and it's going to be about running the football and finding success with that. But if they're able to find more success through the air, if they're able to take Diontae Johnson and George Pickens and make those guys some supreme playmakers who are getting the big plays, getting the touchdowns, I really think this offense is going to be even better than what we've been forecasting it to be. I still think there's ways to go and there's a lot to prove in this department. But when we look at the hard numbers and how open Diontae Johnson gets, regardless of the cover scheme, and where George Pickens has been strong and is trying to work out getting stronger, I think all of this adds up to a more exciting offense to watch in 2023. And yes, I know there's people saying there, yeah, but what about Matt Canada? I'm telling you, I don't think that that's going to be as much of an issue this year because they'll be opening up the offense just a bit more for the likes of Kenny Pickett to run the offense and work with some of these talents that they put around him, like George Pickens, like Diontae Johnson's, like Pat Freiermuth, like Najee Harris and the crew there. So all that being said, I think there's still a lot to look out there. Go look up the stats on receptionperception.com. Shout out to Matt Harmon for a great website that he's created there. It's an awesome thing. Subscribe to it if you want all of that data that I was talking about here and all the different things that you can pull up there. And thanks again to everyone for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're going to take a break for the weekend. We hope everyone has a good long weekend. We know that the 4th of July is coming up here on Tuesday. We'll still try to get shows out at the beginning part of the week just to keep you guys rolling with Steelers content here. But again, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com, where you can find me all the time writing about Pitt athletics or doing the North Shore Drive podcast for them, talking more about Steelers and Pittsburgh sports. And you can find me on the Locked On Steelers podcast Monday through Friday, talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you again on Monday.